This past summer, I finally got a job. I finally met the requirement of being 5'4". Okay, maybe I was actually 5'2", but pretended to be 5'4". Despite lying on the paperwork, I finally got to be part of the detasseling force. However, for feeling like the baked potato most of the time, $7.25 was definitely not worth it. But I needed the money to pay late fees on books I checked out at the library, so I continued to detassel all summer. As a young man who wants to contribute more to the workforce than detasseling corn, I want to make sure that I get a good job that pays well. That is why today, I stand in affirmation of a bill to increase the federal minimum wage to benefit American workers. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the $7.25 federal minimum wage was economically and morally indefensible. Now, the pandemic is highlighting the gross imbalance between the productivity of our nation's workers and the wages they are paid. Many of the essential workers who have braved a public health crisis to keep food on the table and care for our loved ones are still not being paid enough to provide for themselves or their families. Around the country, Americans across the political spectrum have repeatedly supported raising the minimum wage. In November of 2020, more than 60% of voters in Florida voted to increase the state minimum wage, a well-known red state. This bill is a critical step toward lifting hardworking people out of poverty and addressing income inequality and building back a better economy where everyone can succeed. This bill would improve the quality of life for workers in America. Let's be clear, the $7.25 an hour federal minimum wage is a starvation wage. No person in America can make it on $8, $10, or $12 an hour. In the United States of America, a job must lift workers out of poverty, not keep them in it. We must raise the minimum wage to a living wage, which this bill does, raising it to $15 an hour. And when we do that, not only will we be lifting millions of Americans out of poverty, we will be providing a raise to nearly 32 million workers. We can no longer tolerate millions of workers not being able to afford to feed their families or pay the rent. The time for talk is over. No more excuses. It's time for this Congress to act to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. There are currently about 50 million Americans living in poverty according to the United States Census Bureau. According to the Congressional Budget Office in their analysis of the budgetary effects of the Raise the Wage Act of 2021, which is very similar to this bill, the number of people in poverty would be reduced by 0.9 million. The coronavirus pandemic and economic crises have pulled back the veil on the unconscionable economic disparities that working women, low-income families, and other vulnerable communities have faced for decades. However, according to an independent analysis conducted by the Economic Policy Institute, this bill, or the Raise the Wage Act, which is similar to this bill as I had mentioned before, would increase wages for nearly 32 million Americans, including roughly a third of all black workers and a quarter of all Latino workers. More than half of those who would benefit would be women. An increase in the federal minimum wage would boost the quality of life for many marginalized peoples by making goods and services more affordable and accessible. As a result, America will clearly benefit from this bill, as a working economy that ensures basic necessities are acquired is destined for greatness. Because this bill accomplishes this, I stand today in affirmation of this bill. While this bill has noble intentions, it unfortunately only treats the symptoms of income inequality rather than the cause, which would ultimately ensure that many Americans in low-income jobs are no longer able to work at all. That is why I urge my fellow Congress members to not pass this bill. According to an article from CNBC on February 8, 2021, higher wages would increase the cost to employers producing goods and services. Remember that new Lego Harry Potter set you wanted? Well, instead of it being $100, it will be around $150. Remember, those employees would pass some of those increased costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices, and those higher prices, in turn, would lead consumers to purchase fewer goods and services. Employers would consequently produce fewer goods and services, and as a result, they would tend to reduce their employment of workers at all wage levels. When the cost of employing low-wage workers goes up, the relative cost of employing higher wage workers or investing in machines and technology goes down. Some employers would therefore respond to a higher minimum wage by shifting toward those substitutes and reducing their employment of low-wage workers. According to the same study mentioned before by the Congressional Budget Office, the government deficit will increase by $54 billion. This alone should be enough to raise alarm and open our eyes to not pass this bill. However, if this isn't enough for you, 1.4 million jobs will be lost if the minimum wage is raised to $15 an hour. This should be enough to persuade all of you to vote in negation of this bill. Companies will not want to hire workers because they might think the labor they are doing is not worth $15. Kroger, for example, is about to test its first store that offers only self-service checkout lanes using enhanced capabilities in Dallas, Texas. If we pass this bill, every company will be doing this. This is what happens when you force corporations to pay $15 an hour for labor that can be replaced with machines. I don't like self-checkouts. I think we have all had a newfound appreciation for the simplest of interactions, even if it is just to pay for some Pepto-Bismol after eating all that ice cream by yourself. Furthermore, this bill will absolutely demolish small businesses, like the ones from my home state, and help huge corporations like Walmart and Amazon. This is because huge corporations have made so much money that they can afford to pay their employees $15 an hour, while smaller businesses don't have nearly the amount of money big corporations have, and would eventually have to fire employees, which would decrease the rate at which they are selling their products or services, or they would go bankrupt and the business would just die off as a whole. An increase in the federal minimum wage would decrease the quality of life for 1.4 million people by eradicating their jobs. Additionally, big corporations will have less competition from small businesses, and America will see an increase in the government deficit. As a result, the United States of America will clearly not benefit from this bill, as an increased number of unemployed number spells disaster for our country. For these reasons, I proudly stand in negation of this bill and urge my fellow Congress members to join me in voting no on this bill.